Good morning. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. In today's hearing, we will examine legislative options to check the struggling EHR modernization effort, to address VA management concerns, and to authorize VA's newest effort to modernize its supply chain. I'll begin with my bill, which is H.R. 2499, the Supply Chain Management System Authorization Act. Though I've been in Congress a short time, I've learned that one of the VA's major modernization efforts over the past decade have been plagued by some challenges. GAO's written testimony highlights one of the roots of this problem, and to quote them, the VA often puts actions ahead of planning. This reality at the department is precisely why Congress must be involved in VA's major programs, and why I believe we need to be specifically authorize VA's supply chain effort. My bill would give Congress the ability to have more control over the scope, planning, and spending of this major project by authorizing the VA to purchase and implement a system for VHA focused specifically on inventory management, requiring the system to be implemented in 3 years, and directing VA to begin with a pilot of the system at one location to make sure it really works for the VA before implementing it across the country. I appreciate that the department still has some concerns with the bill, but considering the VA's struggle with a number of major projects like the EHR Modernization Program, which is the subject of the next two bills, I'm convinced that H.R. 2499 is vitally important. Now I'll turn to H.R. 592, the Department of Veteran Affairs Electronic Health Record Modernization Improvement Act, introduced by Chairman Bost. Congress never authorized the EHR Modernization Program, and it has struggled from the very beginning. The program is live at only 5 medical centers after 5 years, and over $5 billion have been spent. It has faced issue after issue, and providers and veterans at these 5 sites are not getting the support and care they need. That is why H.R. 592 would require medical center and VISN leadership to certify the EHR is ready for their hospital before it can be installed. It would also require the secretary to certify the EHR is running without issue 99.9% of the time, which is a requirement in the contract before the EHR can be installed anywhere else. VA must take these steps to make sure it does not repeat mistakes made at the first 5 sites. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about this bill. Also on the agenda today is H.R. 608 to terminate the Electronic Health Record Modernization Program of the Department of Veteran Affairs. This bill was introduced by Mr. Rosendale, the chairman of the Subcommittee on Technology Modernization, and I will let him speak to the details of this bill. Another bill on today's agenda that would impact the EHR Modernization Program is H.R. 1659, the Department of Veteran Affairs IT Modernization Improvement Act. This bill was introduced by Ranking Member Takano and would require VA to contract for an independent verification and validation assessment of 5 major IT modernization efforts to include the EHR Modernization Program and the Supply Chain Program. Lastly, we have H.R. 1658, the Managed VA Act. Also introduced by Ranking Member Takano, this bill would create an Undersecretary for Management. The position would be responsible for VA's budget, accounting, procurement, human resources, information technology, and other VA central office functions. I will recognize Ranking Member Takano in a few minutes to speak to his bills. Again, thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to our discussion. And I now recognize Ranking Member Mervan for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair Higgins. I'm looking forward to discussing 2 bills that I've co-sponsored with Ranking Member Takano at our hearing today. As the chair of Technology Modernization Subcommittee last Congress, I've seen firsthand the impacts of failures to improve VA's large IT systems. The Department of Veterans Affairs IT Modernization Improvement Act is a strong first step to introducing a higher level of support and accountability for the VA and for Congress. Independent verification and validation is not a new concept and has been successfully utilized at the Department of Defense to ensure that the department and the taxpayers get what they pay for. I am very pleased to see that VA supports this effort, and I look forward to hearing their testimony on this bill today. A second broader and more aspirational bill we will discuss today is the Managed VA Act, which should create an Undersecretary of Management at the VA and consolidate acquisition and business functions at the department. Creating one management position is not going to fix every issue that VA has had with managing acquisitions, budget, and IT across the department, but it's a start. I feel it is time to provide a position that has the authority and weight to ensure that we don't keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. We found out last Congress that it took a decision from Secretary to end the failed supply chain modernization attempt with Dimmels as we move towards yet another attempt at modernizing supply chain management. I want to ensure we are providing VA with every resource possible to get a successful program at this time. I would also like to acknowledge my colleagues' bills concerning the EHRM program. I was happy to lead the EHRM transparency law with Chairman Bost and Ranking Member Takano on a bipartisan basis last Congress. I look forward to continuing to work on a bipartisan basis on this program and get a system and result that will benefit veterans and employees. I'm happy to say that we will be introducing and I will co-sponsor the EHRM Reset Act introduced by Senator Tester. This bill is an ideal platform for negotiating a long-term bipartisan fix to the program. This bill will address a number of issues, including in Chairman Bost's legislation today, and I look forward to collaborating across the aisle as we successfully accomplished last Congress. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Mervan. I now recognize Ranking Member for the full committee, Mr. Takano, to speak on his bills, H.R. 1658 and H.R. 1659.
Well, thank you, Chair Kiggins. I'm happy to discuss two bills today that I've introduced in this Congress. I'm also happy to say that Chairman Bost and I will be working together on a bipartisan basis on a long-term solution to the EHRM program with our planned introduction of Senator Tester's EHRM Reset Act this week. We've had a lot of success working together on a bipartisan basis, and I look forward to continuing to work across the aisle to fix this problem. The Department of Veterans Affairs IT Modernization Improvement Act will require VA to contract for independent verification and validation of the EHRM, FMBT, supply chain, and VBMS modernization programs. The key word there being independent. For too long, Congress has not had the visibility into these large IT modernization programs that we need to provide necessary oversight. This will also be an invaluable tool for VA to ensure that the government, veterans, and taxpayers are getting what they pay for. This is a long-standing best practice of DoD, and given the ever-increasing size of the VA, the time is now to create this capacity. My second bill, the Manage VA Act, will create an Undersecretary for Management at the VA and consolidate acquisition and business functions at the department. With the continued appearances of acquisition management and management IT acquisitions and operations on the GAO high-risk list, it's past time that we designated an undersecretary whose expertise will be the business of government. The failures to modernize VA's financial systems, supply chain management, health records, etc., has had a direct impact on the care and benefits we provide to veterans. VA has not been provided with the management and acquisition resources commensurate with their responsibilities. Leadership is needed on these business functions so that our VA employees can do what they do best, which is provide exceptional care and benefits to our veterans. I hope both bills can get bipartisan support. It's in everyone's best interest to ensure that we are managing the business of VA wisely. I encourage all my colleagues to support these bills, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Takano. We will now turn to witness testimony. Testifying before us today, we have Mr. Philip Christie, who's the Deputy Executive Director for the Office of Acquisition, Logistics, and Construction at the Department of Veteran Affairs. And he's accompanied by Ms. Catherine Cravens, who's the Chief of Staff for the Office of Information Technology at the Department of Veteran Affairs. And we have Dr. Leslie Sophocleous, who is Executive Director of the Program Management Office for the Electronic Health Record Modernization Integration Office at the Department of Veteran Affairs. And we have Ms. Shanna Love Holman, who is Acting Assistant Secretary for the Office of Enterprise Integration at the Department of Veteran Affairs. And last but not least, we have Ms. Shelby Oakley, who is Director for Contracting and National Security Acquisition at the Government Accountability Office. Ms. Oakley, you appear outnumbered by Veteran Affairs members, but I trust you're not outgunned. And now I'd like to swear in our witnesses, so I'll ask all witnesses to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you so much. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. Mr. Christie, we will start with you. You are recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Keegans, Ranking Member Mervin, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the pending legislation that would affect VA programs and services. Today, I am blessed and flanked by some incredible talent. Joining me are Dr. Leslie Sofklius, Executive Director of Electronic Health Record and Modernization and Program Management Office, Ms. Shana Love-Holman, the Acting Assistant Secretary, Office of Enterprise Integration, and Catherine Cravens, the Chief of Staff for the Office of Information and Technology. Madam Chairwoman, in my oral testimony, I will highlight the department's views concerning the 5 bills on the agenda. Regarding the 5 bills we are here to discuss, the VA supports certain provisions of the proposed bills and would like to highlight areas of concern and certain provisions we oppose. VA appreciates the intent behind the bills and looks forward to discussing the opportunities to continue to improve program management, accountability, and jointness within the department. The rationale for our VA's position is outlined in our written statement. First, the VA Electronic Health Record Modernization Improvement Act, H.R. 592, which VA supports in part. VA supports the bill's requirement that VA continue to partner with the Department of Defense and the Federal Electronic Health Record Modernization Office to improve overall performance within the EHR and the systems connected to it. However, VA does not fully support some of the specific prohibitions and certification requirements. As currently written, the proposed limitations would pause program activities and cause significant cost impacts. We suggest modifications to the bill text to ameliorate these concerns, and we believe the modifications would work towards facilitating the intent of the bill. The second bill, focused on EHR H.R. 608, would require the Secretary to terminate the program, abolish the EHR Integration Office, and revert facilities where the new EHR is deployed back to VISTA. VA opposes this bill, as it would frustrate VA's ability to have an interoperable and longitudinal record with the Department of Defense. Modernizing VA's EHR is critical for providing the best care for our veterans and facilitates advancements in the delivery of that care. We believe terminating the program would work against those goals. As for H.R. 1659, the IT Modernization Improvement Act, the VA supports the bill if amended and with appropriations. This bill would direct VA to contract for independent verification and validation of certain modernization efforts of the department. Ideally, VA would have in-house team with the expertise to conduct IV&V of its major modernization efforts. Contracting IV&V support while VA builds internal capacity makes practical sense and will help expedite the resulting delivery of benefits and services to veterans, their caregivers, and family members. VA anticipates an IV&V contract of this size would be extremely expensive. Appropriate and timely funding of this bill is critical. Regarding H.R. 1658, the Managed VA Act, the VA does not support. This bill would create a new Undersecretary for Management as the Chief Management Officer of the department. Integrating the department's efforts in creating operational jointness in our support of veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors is essential to veterans choosing VA for care, benefits, and services. VA has implemented robust governance to drive jointness and integration in support of the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary, who serves as VA's Chief Operating Officer. This framework enables evidence-based, risk-informed decision-making that advances the mission of the VA. Currently, the Assistant Secretary for Enterprise Integration serves as the VA Accountable Executive for Enterprise Management and Governance in support of the Office of the Secretary. In addition, VA has one of the most outstanding customer experience offices in the federal government, which serves as a key partner within our enterprise governance framework to ensure we continue to put veterans first in all of our decisions and all of our program execution. The VA already has in place many of the functions this bill prescribes. Finally, VA cites concerns with a draft bill that would authorize the Secretary to carry out an IT system and prioritize certain requirements to manage supply chains for medical facilities. As written, the bill may impede ongoing efforts toward an enterprise supply chain solution. We are concerned about the timeline for implementation does not accurately reflect the complexities involved in successful procurement and execution. VA welcomes the opportunity to continue working with the committee to provide additional technical assistance that will create the flexibility and the scope and timing needed to ensure the success of the supply chain mission. Madam Chairwoman, before I close, I wanted to share our deepest appreciation to the committee and all of the staff that have worked with us regarding these bills. This concludes my statement, and we would be happy to answer any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Christie. And Ms. Oakley, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Chairwoman Kiggins, Ranking Member Mervan, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here today to assist you with your consideration of the legislative proposals to improve VA management and key modernization programs. While Congress provides VA with hundreds of billions of dollars each year, we are all aware of the opportunities VA has wasted because it hasn't followed disciplined management approaches when planning and executing its programs. EHRM is just one example, but a critical one. We added VA acquisition management and healthcare to our high-risk list because VA lacks a disciplined management approach, among other challenges. Our updated assessment of these high-risk areas will be issued tomorrow. The 5 bills the committee is considering reflect the underlying theme that change is needed. As I laid out in my written statement, we have issued an expansive body of work on effective management practices and made prior recommendations in line with aspects of the proposed legislation. Today, I will discuss ways in which this work could help Congress and VA as you seek lasting and transformative change. For example, we identified key strategies for implementing chief management officer positions, like the proposed VA Undersecretary for Management. These include ensuring that the CMO responsibilities are clearly defined and documented, and that the CMO have a high and sustained level of authority. We have also recommended CMO positions be established by other departments, such as DoD and DHS. Each department followed our identified key strategies to different degrees, and as a result, have experienced varied success in integrating this position. Leadership is essential, but so is good information for decision-making. We have long recognized independent verification and validation as a best practice. When agencies are developing or acquiring a system, IV&V can help reduce risk by having a knowledgeable, independent party determine that the system meets users' needs and fulfills its intended purpose. We have identified key elements of effective IV&V plans that may be helpful to Congress as it considers this proposed legislation. These include risk-based criteria for determining which programs or aspects of programs require IV&V and establishing standards for independence. We recently recommended that VA reinstitute plans to conduct an EHRM, independent operational assessment, which could be an element of an overall IV&V review. IV&V is a specific solution to one of the challenges the EHRM program faces. As the draft legislation indicates, the subcommittee is greatly concerned with broader program challenges. Our reported findings and those of the IG over many years validate your concerns. For instance, we recently reported to Congress that the overwhelming majority of users are not satisfied with the system. Whichever approach Congress chooses for this program, heeding the numerous GAO and IG recommendations and lessons learned from the current effort, could help ensure that VA uses a more disciplined management approach in pursuit of programmatic success. Finally, as VA pursues a new supply chain management system, our recommendations and our leading practices for effective pilot programs could come in handy. For instance, 2 years ago, we recommended that VA develop a comprehensive supply chain management strategy to guide its multiple interrelated efforts. This strategy should drive the development of whatever system VA requires, not vice versa. but VA is moving forward with its system acquisition despite still developing this strategy. Additionally, our prior work, consistent with the draft legislation, indicates that effective pilots can inform and facilitate program and policy decisions, especially for significant modernization programs. These practices for pilot programs call for having clear, well-defined, appropriate, and measurable objectives, among other things. In conclusion, the challenges these bills are trying to fix are complex and there are really no easy solutions. However, consistently applying leading practices and strategies summarized in my testimony will better position VA to fulfill its mission in the years ahead. Your continued oversight will be essential to holding VA accountable for delivering what it has promised to our veterans. Thank you again for having me here this morning. This concludes my statement, and I look forward to any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Oakley. And now I'd like to recognize Mr. Rosendale to speak on his bill HR 608.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kiggins, for holding this hearing, and to Chairman Boss for making oversight of the Electronic Health Record Modernization Project a major priority for this committee. We owe it to our nation's veterans to have a safe, fully functioning electronic record system. Quite frankly, I feel sorry for the witnesses that are here trying to defend a demonstrably failed system. The Oracle Cerner Electronic Health Record System operates at 5 of the 171 VA medical centers. The VA acknowledges the system has created unacceptable levels of productivity losses, patient safety risks, and staff burnout at these 5 small to medium-sized facilities. Veterans at these 5 facility centers have complained about lost medication in the mail, receiving other veterans' medication, delayed specialist appointments and diagnostic tests, confusion with the patient portal, and generally increased wait times, widespread errors in their personal information. We're also seeing experienced employees at these 5 medical centers leaving their jobs because of frustrations with the system. In a survey, 60% of the staff at one of the centers said the system has made them question whether to continue working there. I was pleased with Secretary McDonough's recent decision to continue the pause on implementing the disastrous system at other VA sites. While Secretary McDonough deserves credit for this decision, I think it's unwise to delay the inevitable. This system and this project have simply not worked out and are bleeding critical resources from the VA at astronomical rates. And there is no reason to believe that that's going to change. It's not just bad execution, it's flawed concept. The VA is not ready to accomplish a massive EHR replacement. The VA's cost estimate was initially $16.1 billion over 10 years. Now, the Institute for Defense Analysis is estimating up to $38.9 billion for implementation over 13 years. Our nation is over $31 trillion in debt, yet we're throwing billions of dollars at a failed EHR system that is compromising veteran safety. And this is unacceptable. I introduced the EHR Termination Act to put a stop to this madness before the VA spends billions of dollars more of taxpayers' money. My legislation would abolish the Electronic Health Record Modernization Integration Office and transfer any functions to the Veterans Health Administration or the Office of Information and Technology at the VA. It would also revert all 5 medical centers using the Oracle Cerner EHR system back to Vista and CPRS. Moreover, it would prevent the VA from exercising any options on Oracle Cerner's contract, causing it to expire within 1 year. The Congressional Budget Office estimated my legislation would reduce discretionary costs by about $8 billion over 5 years. The taxpayer has already shelled out over $5 billion for this project, and the only thing we have to show for it is worse care for our veterans. Money that the taxpayer expended should be returned because of this poor performance. The job of the VA should be providing veterans the world-class benefits and services that they have earned, not doling out billions of dollars to Silicon Valley companies. It's time to put our nation's veterans first by terminating the Oracle Cerner electronic health record system. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. Now we'll turn to questions, and I'd like to yield myself 5 minutes. And starting with Mr. Christie, HR 2499 would authorize a VA supply chain management system. And I know the VA is pursuing a massive enterprise-wide VA supply chain management system under its own authority, but what is the VA's independent life cycle cost estimate for that effort?
So, ma'am, as we're working through the concepts of the supply chain and the overarching strategy, we still do not have a finalized cost estimate for what that will be in its total. It's something that's under development. Understand that when that number is arrived at, that we could share it with you in the committee.
Do you think you could get it to us by the end of the week? Could you commit to that?
I cannot commit to the end of the week that we'll have that number. It's still under development.
Do you know approximately how long it will take?
So 2 components here. So there's the internal estimate that the program office will be working up. As part of the acquisition strategy, we're using a statement of objectives for the actual procurement. And what that means is we're going to lay out the objectives, and industry will come back to us with their solutions and their cost to deliver on those solutions. And depending who wins through that procurement competition, that would be the cost of the procurement itself. Now, obviously, a program is just more than the contract, but all the ancillary and overhead costs with that. But that will be a key component into what is the cost of this program. So yes, the program's taking its stab at what will this cost through a life cycle. A big, really important step to this, though, is what will be the procurement cost, because that's where a lot of the money will go, frankly. And so until we have those numbers, we're not able to provide that to you. We still don't have the procurement out on the street, right? That's still under development along with the strategy.
So are we talking weeks or months, or is this going to take another year? I'm just wondering what the timeline looks like for that cost estimate.
I'm going to, just for as a working concept, I'd say it would about 6 months before we could have that number ratcheted down.
Okay. We would like that number as soon as you have that available, please.
Tracking.
We just need that before going forward, I'll say that. Ms. Oakley, you testified that, just to quote your statement, a recurring theme from our findings has been that the VA often puts action ahead of planning. Would you please explain why this finding is so important when we're talking about starting major projects like the supply chain management system?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. Yeah, it's been a recurring theme that we've seen, especially with regard to the supply chain management approaches that VA has attempted over the years in terms of putting action ahead of strategy. And I think, a perfect example of this is the fact that 2 years ago, we made a recommendation about instituting or developing a comprehensive supply chain management strategy that would guide acquisition of the individual technical solutions that VA is seeking for the system itself. And unfortunately, that strategy is not finished, but the acquisition is proceeding. And to comment on the life cycle cost estimate issue, having a life cycle cost estimate before committing to a program is super important, and our work in other agencies has validated having that as a key piece of the business case information for committing to a program is essential to understanding if you're going to get what you're saying for the cost and within the timeframes that you are anticipating.
I agree, and it's hard to do much without having that before we can go forward. So, Mr. Christie, do you agree with the GAO's testimony that the VA is often, or has in the past, acted before it's sufficiently planned?
Yes, I do concur with that. There's numerous GAO findings and IG findings. This is what we're trying to correct through the supply chain. And I know probably frustrating to say, hey, when are you going to give me the number? But it's wanting to make sure that we don't repeat the sins that GAO and IG and others have identified. We want to get this right and not go out the door and repeat the same things that we've been doing for years.
Agree very much. So, Ms. Oakley, my bill would require the VA to pilot the new supply chain platform's functions prior to wider deployment. Can you explain why it's important to pilot a program like this before rolling it out VA-wide?
Absolutely. Piloting a program can provide you with valuable information on whether it's going to meet its intended purpose and whether it's even scalable across the enterprise. So when you consider an organization like VA as big and complex with medical centers with different needs, and different, configurations and whatnot. A pilot would allow you to understand those pain points, get feedback from users, people who are actually going to be implementing the system, and incorporate that feedback to make changes to the program to be able to then scale it and distribute it across the organization. And, it's not just, as my testimony stated and as my written testimony stated, it's not just as simple as putting in place a pilot. It has to be structured effectively such that you can collect data from that pilot to be able to use going forward. And our leading practices would indicate ways in which that can happen for VA.
Out of curiosity, did we pilot the AHR program then as well before moving forward?
I'm not certain of that answer. Maybe VA can answer that question. I'm not sure I've been around long enough to know that.
Yeah, Mr. Christie, do you know?
I'm going to pass to Dr. Leslie Sophocles.
So, ma'am, I would say based off of the conversation here, it's probably not the same type of pilot. We were in IOC and we had some initial sites, but I can see that, there was the ability for us to probably have some lessons learned from the approach that was just referenced.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and agreeing with the value of piloting a program. I think going forward, and hindsight's always 20/20 and lessons learned, but that probably would have been a great idea. Ms. Oakley, the VA's healthcare and acquisition management are on GAO's high-risk list. Could a supply chain management system focused on the VHA and with clear metrics help fix the VA's healthcare and acquisition management issues?
I think it would go a long way. It's certainly a driver of many of the challenges that we've identified in that area for VA over the years. And I think one thing that you mentioned that is important to note is, our work for product development, system development would indicate that kind of taking an incremental approach to developing a system as critical as the supply chain management system would give VA an opportunity to release initial capabilities, understand how those are working, and then continue to build on those capabilities going forward. And I think your bill advocates for limiting the scope of the effort, at least initially, to then be able to understand how it could be expanded to VA's enterprise-wide supply chain. And we think that that's a good measured approach.
Thank you, and I concur. Look forward to seeing the bill to fruition. And next, I'll turn to Ranking Member Mervan for his questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Ms. Oakley, my first question for you is regarding H.R. 1659, Ranking Member Takano's IT Modernization Improvement Act. Specifically from your experience with independent verification and validation, is there any major IT program that VA that you think would not benefit from the IVV?
I definitely don't think I can think of any program that would be considered under this bill that couldn't benefit from additional quality information to support decision-making. In fact, one of the criteria that we have, one of our best practices for IV&V would focus on risk-based criteria for determining which programs are suitable for IV&V or which aspects of programs are suitable for IV&V. And that would be things like the maturity of the technology, the criticality of the system to the mission, things like that that would drive the decisions. And I think the programs that you mentioned are all pretty critical to VA. So I can't think of one that wouldn't benefit.
Specifically for a program like EHRM, do you feel like the program is too far along for the IVV to be a benefit going forward?
I don't think it's ever too late to do the right thing. The program is pretty in the pretty early stages with only 5 sites rolled out. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done from a development perspective. And I think it's also important to note that each location has different needs. And so there might be different requirements for each location. And so having a concerted IV&V effort for a program like EHRM as it continues to roll out I think is critically important to provide that really good quality information to make those go, no go decisions and the certifications that are outlined in the bill.
Mr. Christie, from your testimony, I see that you have some good constructive technical amendments to the bill, which we will definitely consider. From your perspective overall, I would really like to hear your opinion of this bill and the IVV. Overall, as it relates to these large IT modernization programs at VA?
Yeah, I think through the identification of what we talked about earlier with many GAO reports and IV&V support, of those modernization efforts or any large programs is extremely helpful to the VA. Fully support this. And back to the comments by Ms. Oakley, you know, I think the key thing there is I wanted to kind of lock in is that we believe in all the best practices that were put out into those different reports, you know, the criteria when you're using the independence, the upfront rules, making sure we're paying for it, and that there's oversight of itself of the IV&V program. But from an acquisition and a VA perspective, this is a good thing for the VA and veterans. We're going to start getting help with making sure the money that's spent, we're getting the buck, getting the money that we're, getting the value from the money we're spending on veterans. So again, fully support this.
I appreciate those comments and appreciate your attention to helping to increase accountability and results from these programs. I want to give you the opportunity as well right now to offer any thoughts you may have on the support outside of IVV that you need in the OALC. I realize that Congress has put an enormous burden on your office in executing these large acquisitions, and I want to give you the opportunity to let us know what else you need from us to help increase effective acquisitions at VA.
Yeah, I'm going to pull a line from GAO's testimony. If you saw in there, there was a 147% increase in procurement in the last 10 years. So that's just the procurement piece, not the program management. But I'm using that to kind of highlight how much work has come to the VA, how much responsibility that is laid on acquisition officials. So both contracting folks, but also program folks. I'll share with you the steady state of the, how many acquisition folks we have at the VA has not grown with that 147% spike in 10 years. So you got a huge workload on the acquisition workforce here. We would welcome opportunities to discuss how can we approach that, streamline you know, procurements, program oversight, et cetera, as the IV&V. No, that's another great example of help the VA needs to improve acquisition and program management, accountability, and jointness. So some of this gets down to resources that I think, you know, maybe an offline TA or discussion would be really helpful to that conversation. But generally speaking, the acquisition workforce has a huge workload on it, and the requirements are growing without corresponding growth of the workforce.
With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mervan. Now, the chair would like to recognize Mr. Rosendale for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. While it wasn't designated as such, unfortunately, the Oracle Cerner EHR system has been a multi-billion-dollar pilot project that has not even vaguely worked out and stands to consume billions of valuable resources in the future with no foreseeable improvement if not stopped. Ms. Sophocles, 2 weeks ago, the VA announced through an email from the director of Vision 10 that implementation of the Oracle Cerner EHR will be postponed in Saginaw, Michigan. That announcement left a lot of things unsaid. I want to allow you to set the record straight today. Are the other upcoming sites also postponed, including Battle Creek, Detroit, Chillicothe, Dayton, and elsewhere in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Wisconsin?
Sir, thank you for the question. We've said that we would evaluate the sites as we move forward to ensure that we do not have any of the additional patient safety issues we've talked about. We make the improvements in terms of system uptime and performance, and then we also address some of the change management and adoption issues. We will continue to do that and make informed decisions moving forward on those additional sites. We can see that veterans and the clinicians need to have a system that works for them, and we'll continue to do that as we move forward, sir.
So will you be setting another go-live date for any of these sites?
So,
And
sir,
how much lead time will you be giving this committee in advance of going live in those additional sites?
Sir, we will inform this committee of any decisions we will make, and we will ensure that there's informed time so that there's questions and that the sites are aware of our plans moving forward. Obviously, we want to make sure that we have all stakeholder involvement in any decisions we make moving forward.
So before we are announcing, I'm trying to narrow down some time frames so I know what I'm going to be dealing with, okay? Are we looking at 30 days notice, 60 days notice, 180 days notice? What kind of notice do you commit to this committee giving us before we go live on any additional sites?
Sir, I will take that a record to come back with a time frame on that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome,
Appreciate it.
sir.
Thank you. Ms. Sophocles, tell me about the decision not to proceed with implementing the Oracle Cerner system in Ann Arbor, Saginaw, and elsewhere. Who made the decisions, and how were they made, and what was the role of the medical center directors from each of these visits?
Yes, sir. So in all our sites, we have, I think we've briefed before previously, we have the site readiness, which we use in our previous sites, albeit we've had some issues after our previous deployments, that look at key categories in terms of, training, adoption, whether or not we have technology in place, interfaces in place. Those are all decisions that we use to evaluate. We have, based off of the sprint report and the assess and address, come up with additional operational metrics that we want to incorporate. And as we use that, we will use that to inform decisions in terms of joint decisions, I might say, in terms of whether or not we want to proceed with any deployments at the site. That framework was used for Ann Arbor and Saginaw. In Arbor, we did reference that had pharmacy tied to it, research tied to it. And we wanted to make sure that we have that effectively addressed. And then for Saginaw, we still had additional work that had to be performed in terms of the site readiness. Those decisions are collaborative decisions. They're not made in a vacuum. We do involve the visit and site leadership. VHA is involved, and OIT. And then obviously the Deputy Secretary is informed and provides the final viewpoint and a vote on us to proceed. But it is a collaborative process under governance.
So this local decision-making process sounds like a lot like HR 592, the AHR Improvement Act, would require. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir, it does, in a sense, yes, sir.
Okay, and when you go through this analysis and this collaboration, are you deferring to the directors of those facilities to give them any type of veto power whatsoever?
So I think we
I mean, if they identify deficiencies, they identify areas that they just are not ready, or are we going to defer to the people on the ground?
So we make informed decisions, and I think the key part here is mitigations that we have in place, and that's a conversation that we have. Like hypothetically, we would have to talk about whether or not the mitigations are in place, the mitigations are effective, and also whether or not they're going to impact operations at the ground to make that decision. So I think that's the approach we would take and what we've made previously in terms of whether or not the mitigations are the effective mitigations to allow the sites to continue to perform effectively.
Okay, so not to put words in your mouth, but it still sounds to me like what we have is a discussion, a collaboration, but at the end of the day, the heavy hand of the Veterans Administration is going to make the decision about whether something's going to be implemented or not.
So, sir,
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. The chair now recognizes Ms. McCormick for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. Love Holmes, I realize that the VA feels that they don't need an undersecretary for management and that the deputy secretary has had this authority previously. Unfortunately, I think that we all know that proficiency in the business of government is not a prerequisite for the deputy secretary. I know that in your current position, you are performing some of the governance that we are looking for. So I would like to hear from you the opportunity to answer these questions. The current governance structure for the management of the VA, what is your view on it? And two, what improvements would you recommend?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'd first like to start off by just saying this is an organization that I'm very proud to work for VA, and we have an amazing mission. Specifically with regard to the current structure, I've had the pleasure of being there from the ground up in creating the enterprise governance framework that we have now. We have the VA Operations Board that is chaired by the Deputy Secretary, who serves as our Chief Operating Officer, and we have the VA Executive Board that is chaired by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. As we've put these two boards together, we were very thoughtful about who needs to participate in these boards. And so there is a mix of participants from the political staff, the career staff, participants from VA Central Office, as well as field leadership to ensure that we have representation from across the organization. Also, the chief executive officers participate as well, the chief acquisition officer, information officer, et cetera, to ensure that everyone has a seat at the table. there are really three parts to these boards that I'm very proud of, and we really did look also at the GAO report and try to understand the intent there and those comments and the criteria for what it looks like to create a good COO. The governance framework is around transparency, making sure that all folks that are going to be impacted by a decision are brought to the table. And so going back to a previous comment, that means that if there's something that's happening about you, we're bringing you there to the table to have an opportunity to talk about it. Also about accountability in terms of making sure that we have accountable officials for the various projects or programs that are there at the table, but there's also accountability across the table, meaning even if you're not the chief for a particular program, what is my responsibility as the acting assistant secretary in supporting this initiative? What is the CIO's responsibility in supporting it, in supporting the various initiatives? And lastly, we've also tried to be grounded in evidence-based and principle-based decision-making in terms of, as decisions are coming through governance, really understanding what is the data telling us about the decisions and the recommendations that are coming, and also from a principles-based perspective, ensuring that we are really looking at, is this the best decision for veterans and our employees as we're moving forward? In terms of opportunities for improvements, I think I would agree with my colleagues and the comments that have been made with regard to our opportunity to put in more disciplined management framework, particularly around some of our program management. And we've already begun that for several of our strategic initiatives, many of which are being discussed here today. We're bringing those projects through the governance framework where we're asking those hard questions, and sometimes the hard question is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And making sure that everyone at the table understands what the problem is, understands what the plan is to move forward, and then understand so that so that we're moving forward and creating strategy into action. But I think that that's my response.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Christie. Mr. Christie, I know in your position you're under tremendous pressure to execute a giant acquisition program, and I know you have had this issues with resources. Would it be beneficial to have an advocate in upper management for the VA to champion your needs?
We'll always welcome advocates no matter where we are and what we're doing. But I think to have somebody above the chief acquisition officer, so at the VA, that's the political appointed person for the acquisition. But if it's even higher than that, obviously that helps with being at the table and communicating those risks and where we can get help within acquisition programs. Absolutely would welcome that. Now back to the point of what Ms. Love-Holman said, we do have governance, right? And so there are those avenues when there are concerns to bring those up. And those go to both the deputy secretary, and depending on what the issue is, it could go up to the executive board, which is chaired by the secretary himself. So I think we have those advocates through our governance process, but would always welcome more voices at the table in support of acquisition.
Thank you so much. I just want to emphasize that as the ranking member of Technology and Modernization Subcommittee, I'm interested in finding ways I can support the VA to modernize its IT program. I think Ranking Member Takano's bills are a great start to get us back on track in delivering better healthcare benefits to our veterans and supporting the VA. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much for your comments. And I just to wrap up and close, I just had a couple extra questions for really just for personal knowledge. But Mr. Christie and maybe Dr. Sophocleous, when looking at how we're assessing our electronic charting implementation in the 5 facilities that have begun that process specifically, we have an outside group, this IVV, coming in to do some just overarching critique, I guess, of how that's going. How long do we expect that this IVV to be in place for?
So I'll let you take that one, Liz.
So you're talking about the new IVMV. So I guess the new IVMV, based off of what was proposed, I would think we would want to have that in for long-term for the program in order to be able to help assist with some of the program management and technical pieces of it. There's multiple components of that I think, Mr. Christie said we're already open into. It's probably not a one or done, and I think we'd be open to that.
it's a long-term commitment?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sorry if I might have misunderstood. I wasn't sure if, because there are some current IV&V efforts that are going on in the EHR program today. It's not as formalized as the bill talks about. If the question's geared towards the bill, yes, if you'll see in there, we're talking over the period of this and to follow the GAO recommendations, right? Risk-based, so there might be parts up front really heavy into many topics and areas. As you get to the back part of the acquisition of it, you might taper down on the risk of that, but I would see IV&V going through the total life cycle of an acquisition.
I know it's a huge expense, so I'm wondering what other resources are out there for us to maybe do the same job. And does, for example, does Cerna, Oracle, now do they play any role in this transition process? Just as a nurse practitioner, thinking through when we've gone to electronic charting systems, transition to that on a much smaller scale than what the VA is trying to do. We had the team come in from the company who owned the program, and they sat there in a trailer next to the facility, and they made sure every patient was their charting, their records got transferred, that their current notes were getting transferred, that other test results and whatnot were getting transferred. So what role is Cerna Oracle playing in this whole process?
Yeah, so I think Dr. Sofligius will answer this in a second, but I just want to quickly add, we're in current negotiations with the Oracle Cerner team. A lot of these new standards are being negotiated in a public hearing. We can't disclose them, but I think we can get you that information. But it's to the point you're asking. It's like, hey, what's their involvement? What are the standards? And how is that being wrapped back into the program office? You just don't get us to do all the work. You own the contract, deliver the results that are expected to you in that contract. So those things are ongoing, but I'm going to have Les pile on to what I'm saying here.
So, ma'am, I think, we've talked about like change management. Some of the areas you're talking about, change management training, adoption issues, and we're talking about from the technical standpoint, which we do have IV&V are ready for testing. Obviously, Oracle Cerner is involved in that. I think from if we're talking about independent, then obviously we want to take their input and then have a separate validation to ensure what they're providing is the service that we're paying for. It's effective and it's of use to the sites and to VA. So there's two components of that, I would say.
So I don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, sometimes we get so convoluted, like how many people, and the most important people we need to be talking to are the providers, right? The people that are the end users of this program. Those are the people who have the responsibility to make sure that continuity of care piece and patient safety, all of those really big issues that are the ones that we hear about in our offices, we want to make sure that end product is accomplished. So making sure the providers, the healthcare provider, the physicians, the nurses, those guys who are already busy and already hard to get in a room and to say, we're going to have an hour meeting about how you feel about this electronic charting, but those are should be the loudest voices at that table. So I don't want all of us to get, not only does it cost a lot of money to have all these outside groups looking at that, but I just, tightening that up and making sure we can make the product just the best product possible for the end user, I think is where I would like to see my just to pass my priority along. But thank you. I know it's a work in progress, and I'm finished with my questioning. Ranking Member Van, you have one? Yep, go ahead.
So for Mr. Christie, I'm going to follow on that. What is the timeline, do you believe, for the negotiations to be complete? And what are the outcomes that you're looking for from those negotiations?
Right, and I will ask Les to assist me again, but so there's an option period that comes due May 16th that we have to get past those negotiations so we can move forward to the next options. There was for the initial, it was a 5-year period. We're coming up on that 5-year period, May 16th, and we're negotiating the next 5 years currently. I'll turn over to Les a little bit more about the details of the outcomes of that.
So yes, sir. So we are in negotiations. As Mr. Christie said, May 16th is the period. I think we have some productive negotiation and conversations. Obviously, we're focusing on some of the areas we've talked about. Obviously, system performance is one of the big issues, and our ability to hold Oracle Cerner accountable, which we tend to continue to enforce in our negotiations. We do have backup strategies in place, and we will be more than happy to provide updates as we move forward with the negotiations.
Okay. I guess why I bring that up is because the disconnect between the pharmacy and the different type of results that we were talking about in past meetings, just making sure that those errors are being fixed, and you are to kind of focus on what the chairwoman was saying, making sure that the providers are included and have a seat at the table is so vitally important. That's why I followed up with that question and just wanted to make sure I understand you don't want to negotiate here at the table. And so your answer, but the outcomes, making sure that the providers have a seat at the table, seemed to be one of the priorities through the past meetings, along with accountability. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I ask unanimous consent that all members shall have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material. Hearing no objections, so ordered, and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.